Retro Road Test, Fiat 131 vs Ford Cortina, 1981 UK specs. If there was ever a time when Britain and Europe squared up across the family saloon battlefield, 1981 was it. On one side, the stalwart of British driveways, the Ford Cortina, still wearing its sensible slacks and carrying half the country's sales charts on its shoulders. On the other, the Fiat 131, an Italian attempt at selling the British middle manager something with a bit of Mediterranean flair, provided he wasn't put off by rust or electrics that sometimes had the consistency of wet pasta. Two cars, both alike in dignity, or at least brochure copy, both vying for the loyalty of the upwardly mobile family man who wanted space for the kids, some veneer of style, and, most importantly, a boot that could swallow several boxes of beer from the cash and carry. Let's take them out for a spin, shall we? The contenders, specs on paper. Ford Cortina MKV, 1981 UK spec. Engines, 1.3L, 1.6L, 2.0L Pinto, wheel focus on the 1.6L, the bestseller. Power, 75 bhp, 1.6L. Transmission, 4-speed manual, optional auto. 0-60 miles per hour, 14.0 seconds, 1.6L. Top speed, 95 miles per hour. Suspension, McPherson strut front, live rear axle with leaf springs. Price, new, 1981 around £4,000, 1.6L spec. Fun fact, the Cortina wasn't just Britain's best-selling car, it was Britain, in automotive form. Fiat 131 Mirafiori, 1981 UK spec. Engines, 1.3L, 1.6L, 2.0L twin cam. We'll look at the 1.6L Super Mirafiori, the one people actually bought if they dared. Power, 95 bhp, 1.6L twin cam. Transmission, 5-speed manual, very advanced for the class. 0-60 miles per hour, 11.5 seconds. Top speed, 105 miles per hour. Suspension, independent McPherson strut front, coil-sprung live axle rear. Price, new, 1981 around £4,500 for the 1.6 Super Mirafiori. Fun fact, Fiat made a rallybred 131 Abarth that won world championships. Sadly, the one you got from a Midlands showroom was about as racy as a boiled potato. Styling, pudding vs panettone. Walk around the Cortina and you could be forgiven for thinking that Ford had employed a ruler and little else. Straight lines, square headlights, and a profile that screamed company car. It wasn't ugly, exactly, it just blended into the background like magnolia wallpaper. The vinyl roof option added precisely zero glamour, but it did signal to your neighbors that you had climbed at least 2 rungs up the ladder at ICI. The Fiat 131, meanwhile, was also a box on wheels, but at least it was an Italian box. Slightly crisper edges, a more delicate grille, and details that suggested someone had thought about aesthetics in between espresso breaks. Parked side by side, the Cortina looked like it was designed with a set square, while the Fiat looked like it was designed with a bit of flair, and then promptly left outside in the rain to rust. Inside story, carpets vs corduroy. Step into the Cortina and you were greeted by swathes of grey or brown plastics, depending on which end of the dealer's leftover stock you were raiding. The dashboard was a monument to functional design. Big, simple dials, heater sliders that worked, and controls that felt like they would last longer than your mortgage. Seats were wide, flat, and designed for comfort over cornering support. Long motorway slogs up the M1. Perfect. Spirited blast down a B road. More sliding than a soap bar in a prison shower. The Fiat 131 made more of an effort. You got deeply cowled instruments, a dash angled towards the driver, rather exotic for the time, and fabrics that could pass as stylish if you squinted. The Italians even managed to make the steering wheel look sporty. Seating position was a bit higher than the Cortina's, but the bolstering gave the impression someone had actually thought about holding a driver in place. However, switchgear quality was, let's just say, inconsistent. If the hazard light button stayed attached for longer than a winter, you were winning. Engines: Pinto Porridge vs Pasta alla Twin Cam. The heart of the matter. The Ford's trusty Pinto engine in 1.6L form was the default choice of Britain's reps and dads. Producing around 75 bhp, it wasn't fast, but it was dependable. Torque delivery was steady, if uninspiring, and the engine note was about as thrilling as a wet Sunday in Swindon. On the plus side, it would run on whatever questionable petrol the local garage pumped out, and if it broke, any bloke with a Haynes manual and a spanner could fix it. The Fiat's 1.6 twin cam, on the other hand, was a revelation in this class. With around 95 bhp and a 5-speed gearbox, it actually encouraged enthusiastic driving. Above 3,500 rpm, the engine sang in a way that made the Cortina feel like it was running on treacle. It was smoother, more rev-happy, and, whisper it, genuinely fun. Of course, there was a catch. Keeping a Fiat twin-cam properly tuned required the sort of mechanical dedication usually reserved for rally teams. Neglect it, and you'd soon be catching lifts from your neighbor in his Cortina. Handling: Bovril vs Chianti. On the road, the Cortina was honest but hardly inspiring. The steering was vague, the suspension soft, and body roll was ample enough to induce seasickness in the back seat. It was tuned for comfort, which meant motorway cruising was tolerable, but throw it into a bend and it responded with all the enthusiasm of a Labrador asked to do calculus. That said, it was predictable. You always knew where the limits were, even if they were depressingly low. The Fiat was sharper, no doubt about it. The rack and pinion steering was more direct, the chassis better balanced, and the independent front with coil-sprung rear axle gave it composure the Ford lacked. On a twisting country road, the Fiat felt alive, darting into corners with something approaching Vev. Of course, British weather meant damp tarmac, and with skinny tires, lift-off oversteer was never far away, enough to wake you up, anyway. Reliability: guess who wins? It won't shock you to learn that in 1981, if you wanted your car to start every morning and survive winters without dissolving into orange flakes, you bought the Ford. The Cortina wasn't perfect, but spares were cheap, garages knew them inside out, and Ford dealers were everywhere. Rust? Yes, eventually, but not at Italian speed. Fiat, bless them, never quite nailed durability in the UK climate. The 131's mechanicals could be strong if maintained, but body corrosion was rampant. Electrics had a reputation for comedy timing, and parts availability was patchy. Many a proud 131 owner found themselves driving courtesy Cortinas after repeated trips to the garage. Everyday use, school runs and Sainsbury's. For the family buyer, the Cortina ticked boxes. Huge boot, decent rear legroom, comfortable ride. It was the default choice for good reason, it just worked. The Fiat offered similar practicality, with maybe a shade less boot space but slightly more engaging ergonomics. But when it came to long-term ownership costs and hassle, the Ford made the case with ruthless efficiency. Image: Manager vs Mediterranean. By 1981, the Cortina had become Britain's automotive wallpaper. Everyone had one, from sales reps to middle managers to taxi drivers. It was the Ford Mondeo of its day, a car that symbolized safe choice. It carried no stigma, but also no excitement. The Fiat, on the other hand, offered a whiff of continental sophistication. Owning one suggested you read the Times literary supplement rather than The Sun, and perhaps enjoyed a glass of red with dinner instead of a pint of bitter. The problem was, that image lasted right up until the alternator failed or the doors started bubbling with rust. Then it just marked you out as someone who had made a poor decision. Running costs. The Ford was frugal to run, easy to fix, and depreciation was steady but manageable. Insurance was cheap because everyone and their dog drove one. The Fiat was thirstier if you used the twin-cams revs, servicing costs were higher, and depreciation was catastrophic. Within a few years, used 131s were worth buttons, while Cortinas still commanded decent money. Verdict: TVS Espresso. So, which should you have bought in 1981? If you wanted reliability, practicality, and something that blended seamlessly into Britain's suburban landscape, the Cortina was the obvious choice. It wasn't exciting, but it was solid, dependable, and perfectly suited to the UK market. If, however, you had a taste for something different, if you valued driving enjoyment and were willing to risk rust and unreliability, the Fiat 131 gave you more fizz. It was quicker, handled better, and looked a touch more stylish. But you needed patience, a friendly mechanic, and a willingness to forgive. The Cortina won the sales war for good reason. But the Fiat won hearts, briefly, before it dissolved. Final scores, out of 10. Styling, Cortina 6/Fiat 7. Interior, Cortina 6/Fiat 7. Performance, Cortina 5/Fiat 7. Handling, Cortina 5/Fiat 7. Reliability, Cortina 8/Fiat 4. Practicality, Cortina 8/Fiat 7. Running costs, Cortina 8/Fiat 5. Image, Cortina 6/Fiat 7. Overall. Ford Cortina, 52/80. Fiat 131, 51/80. A photo finish, then. But in the real world, the Cortina's reliability and dealer network meant it took the crown, while the Fiat remains a charming, flawed footnote of an era when Italy tried to tempt Britain away from its Bovril with a dash of Chianti.